Frederick Douglass. His story made history. By Carol Domblewski. Illustrated by John Martin. Good morning, Wareham. What's up, BLA? All right. So, I know we needed some stories, 3 stories, so we could compare 3 things, 3 different pieces of text. And I thought, what better way to do this than do some African American history during African American History Month. We are about to study these 3 figures we're doing. And this will be the second one today. This is Frederick Douglass. And we're going to be continuing on with that. And of course, as I've told you, we'll be doing an open response comparing all 3 of them on Friday. And that's, what better way than to combine these things, right? All right, so I know this will be for Tuesday, but I'm doing this video first, so that's kind of... All right, well, he's kind of a hero of mine, Frederick Douglass. Great speaker. He met with President Lincoln and helped free the slaves. And he helped change opinions in America and help get them freed. One of the good things and kind of ridiculous things is he escaped as a slave, taught himself to write, and he was such a good speaker that it changed many opinions. Like, oh, blacks can be smart. I mean, it's hard to even say this stuff. But at least he went and changed that ignorant opinion. So that's really important, and he was a big help to America itself and bringing equality to everybody. So it's even hard for me to say that, like, hey, African Americans can read and write well, it's awful even to think that way. But at least he inspired a lot of people to change and fix this wrong that had been done. All right, so let's learn about the brave Frederick Douglass, shall we?
Frederick Douglass. His Story Made History by Carol Domblewski. Illustrated by John Martin.
Strategy focus. The author has chosen to portray Frederick Douglass by focusing on his autobiography. As you read, question how well this narrative works in telling Douglass's life story.
Most people can look back on their past and find a story to tell. Few people, however, have ever found a story like Frederick Douglass's. Douglass was born into slavery and forced to live a life of pain and suffering. Yet when he escaped slavery, Douglass turned his despair into triumph. He turned his sorrow into strength. He also turned the story of his life into a reason for ending slavery once and for all. His story became one of the most important autobiographies of all time. Douglass actually wrote his autobiography 3 times. The work people often refer to is called A Narrative of the Life of Frederick Douglass. Other titles of his autobiographies are My Life and Times and My Bondage and My Freedom. They tell the same story, but in different ways. All of them are life stories. All of them are narratives. Frederick Douglass was born Frederick Augustus Washington Bailey in 1818 on a plantation on Maryland's eastern shore. Frederick knew almost nothing about his father except that he was white. His mother, Harriet Bailey, worked in the fields that covered much of the plantation, and Frederick rarely saw her. With his mother working such long hours, Frederick was sent to live with his grandmother until he was old enough to work. In his first years, Frederick hardly realized he was a slave. He would play in the woods near his grandmother's cabin, unaware of the significance of the slave owner who came by occasionally. Frederick would learn the harsh realities of slavery when he was 6. His grandmother brought him to a beautiful house where his brother and 2 sisters were playing in the yard. He ran to play with them and after a while realized that his grandmother was gone. Knowing that he had to stay, Frederick fell in the grass and wept. Frederick and the other slave children were fed nothing but cornmeal, which was dumped in a trough for the children to fight over. The only clothing the children wore were baggy shirts that reached their knees. But the worst of their ordeal was the constant lashings administered by the slave owner. Countless nights, Frederick was kept awake by the screams of his aunt and other slaves of the house. But Frederick was lucky. The cruel slave owner had a daughter, Sophia, who was very fond of Frederick. When Sophia married, she gave Frederick a pair of clean trousers and brought him with her to her new home in Baltimore. In Baltimore, Frederick's only job was to care for his new owner's infant son. He often sat by while Sophia read passages of the Bible to her son. Frederick wanted to learn how to read, and Sophia agreed to teach him. The kind woman was not aware of the law that prohibited slaves to read and write. She began to teach the young Frederick his ABCs. When her husband learned what she was doing, he put a stop to it right away. He convinced her it was unsafe and made her afraid to keep going. But in the case of Frederick, it was too late. The owner's wife had turned on a light that would burn brighter and brighter for Frederick. He had developed a hunger for reading, for words, and for knowledge. Nothing could satisfy that hunger but learning. He kept going on his own. He also got the young white boys he sometimes played with on the city streets to help him. Frederick has said, "Learning the alphabet gave me the key to reading. I took that key, and with a little help from my friends, learned how to read, thus becoming a free man in my mind." Reading was quite uncommon for people who had lived in slavery. It was considered a dangerous activity for enslaved people. Many owners were sure that reading would make them not want to work, since most of the work they did was manual rather than intellectual. They were also afraid that if slaves could read and write, they would be able to forge papers declaring that they were free and escape to the north. It was even against the law to teach slaves to read in some states. Frederick continued reading any time he could. When he had saved up enough money, he bought an issue of The Columbian Orator, which was a collection of speeches and essays on democracy, courage, and freedom. Inspired by the book, Frederick began to learn about the abolitionist movement, that is, the movement to end slavery. As he grew older and became more educated, he learned to detest slavery more and more and to long for his freedom. When Sophia and her husband died, Frederick was sent to the plantation of a slave breaker, Edward Covey. There, Frederick was forced to work from dawn until dusk, plowing, hoeing, and picking corn. Covey would hide in the bushes and spy on his slaves. When he caught any of them resting, he would jump out and beat them brutally. Though he was often beaten, Frederick still had hope for the future. At night, he would gather slaves together and teach them to read. The members of this illegal school planned for their escape, but their plot was discovered and they were jailed. When Frederick was released, he continued as a slave, becoming more and more resentful of his plight. But then he was given a gift. Some of the free slaves in Baltimore had organized the East Baltimore Mental Improvement Society, and Frederick was admitted into the group. This was where Frederick learned how to debate and speak in public. Finally, Frederick couldn't take enslavement anymore. He wanted his freedom too badly. He boarded a train north with false papers in hand. Through sheer luck, Frederick made it to New York City. He came into contact with abolitionists. These people were fighting to end slavery forever. When they met Frederick, they knew right away that they had met a special man. He was thoughtful and intelligent. He spoke so well and so clearly. Here was someone who could help their cause. To protect himself against whites who would have him return to the South, Frederick Bailey changed his name to Frederick Douglass. Douglass first showed the American public who he was and what great things he could do through speaking rather than writing. A turning point in his life occurred at an anti-slavery meeting. It was held in Nantucket, Massachusetts. At that meeting, he spoke to a white audience for the first time. He expressed his own feelings about slavery. He also told some of his own experiences. He told his own story so well, so powerfully, and with such feeling that the Anti-Slavery Society hired him to speak for them. He soon began traveling across the East and Midwest. Everywhere he went, he spoke out against slavery. He also became a spokesman for the rights of free blacks. Douglass said, "The real question, the all-commanding question, is whether American justice, American liberty, American civilization, American law, and American Christianity can be made to include and protect alike and forever all American citizens." At the time, it was dangerous for Douglass to speak. After all, he was an escaped slave. Someone might recognize him. People could hunt for him and return him to his owners. In addition, not everyone wanted to hear what Douglass had to say. Some questioned his story. They did not believe that such a well-spoken, intelligent black man could have been born in slavery. Some said he was lying. Others insulted him. Douglass suffered many personal attacks. Douglass wrote his autobiography in part to let everyone know that what he had been saying was all true. He wrote to stop people from attacking him. He also wrote because the American Anti-Slavery Society wanted him to write his life story. They believed his story would have great power over people who read it. They were right. The autobiography became an instant bestseller. Other former slaves had written before about their experiences, but no one had done it as well as Douglass did it now. Douglass's story was written in flowing, elegant English. It was full of details that brought his story to life. It was also very readable. And as people quickly found, the story was exceptionally powerful. History played a part in its success, too. The timing of his story was perfect. The nation was in turmoil during the late 1840s and 1850s. There had long been an anti-slavery movement in the United States. Most people understood that slavery was incompatible with liberty, and liberty was the watchword of the American Revolution and our nation's history. During the first decades of the 1800s, the tide of public opinion began to move against slavery. Anti-slavery feelings were at a peak when Douglass's autobiography was published in 1845. More and more people were joining the anti-slavery societies that formed in many cities. But the country was also deeply divided over the future of slavery. The economy of the South especially depended on the slave system, and many people defended it. Some people on both sides of the issue were already willing to fight and die for their beliefs. Questions about the future of slavery in America were driving the nation to the brink of civil war. In 1861, the nation went over that brink and plunged into the most destructive war in its history. When people read Douglass's autobiography, they knew exactly what this thoughtful, intelligent man had experienced. Douglass told it all. He described his lonely and difficult childhood. He told about being separated from his mother in a system that ignored family ties. He told about later becoming an orphan. Then he told about being separated from his last remaining relative, his grandmother. Douglass also wrote about having no bed and sleeping on the cold ground in cold weather. He said he survived only because he found an old bag that was used to carry corn during the day. He put the bag over his head to sleep in, but his feet, which did not fit in the bag, stuck out. The frost gave him cracks that were big enough to put a pen in. Douglass also told about being counted up in the worth of a plantation as equal to only one farm animal. He told about families besides his own being separated forever from each other. He told about the endless hard work in the fields. Finally, he told about the terrible violence he and so many others suffered. Many readers finished the book in shock and sadness. They had just one thought in mind: we must end slavery now, for no one before had made them feel slavery's horrors as Douglass made his readers feel them. He helped them understand slavery. More than that, he helped them feel it. Long after slavery ended, Douglass's story continued to have an effect on its readers. More and more writers used autobiography to tell their stories. Often, those writers were African American, like Maya Angelou, who wrote the autobiography, I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings. In their autobiographies, they showed what it meant to be black in a white society. In ways that stirred their readers' emotions just as Douglass had, these writers told stories that showed unfairness and injustice. More than anything, these autobiographies showed the intelligence and the humanity of those who wrote them, bringing sympathetic responses from readers. And just like Douglass's book, these later autobiographies inspired readers to call for changes in the nation's laws and improvements in the lives of all its citizens. Douglass's autobiography also inspired many freedom fighters. One of them was Dr. Martin Luther King, Jr. The famous civil rights leader was deeply moved by Douglass's story. Today, people still read this tale of both great sorrow and great courage. In it, they learn about the past. In it, some also find the strength to make the present better.
All right, so there we go with Frederick Douglass, learning what a great man he was and the autobiographies he wrote and how important he was to the abolitionist movement. All right, so there's plenty of information for you in there for the open response. Today, all you have to do is vocabulary sheet. All right, we'll see you tomorrow. Bye, or Thursday. Or please come to the Zoom Wednesday. That'd be great. All right, bye.